Welcome to the Learn It section for Module 2, where we're focusing on boiling and simmering. The dish for this module is a Cuban black bean and rice dish, which at first may seem very simple. But there is a little bit of preparation that goes into this dish to make sure that the beans are just tender, then the rice is cooked through and fluffy, and that the beans and rice don't just turn into some sort of mush when they're cooked together. So the little bit of preparation that we're going to do now, and what I will do ahead of lab time, is to go ahead and get the dry beans, which I have right here, brining. And what we're going to do first is measure out 1 cup of dried black beans. I'm using my dry measuring cup here. I'm just going to pack it down until I get, looks like 1 cup pretty well. And so what I'm going to do now is transfer that into my mesh strainer. And I'm going to run this under water for a few seconds, taking special care to look through the beans. I'm looking for any blemished beans that might be there or any small stones that may have gotten mixed in. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. And when I'm done rinsing off my beans, I'm going to shake them really well in the sieve to get any extra water out. And I'm just going to let them rest here for just a second while I get the brine ready. Now, the brine for these beans is simply water and salt. And if you look at the recipe calls for 1.5 tablespoons of salt added to the water. Now, we don't have a half tablespoon measuring spoon, but if you'll remember those conversions that we're working on, 1 tablespoon is equivalent to 3 teaspoons. So half of a tablespoon is going to be 1.5 teaspoons. So that way I will go ahead and measure out 1 tablespoon. I'm going to add that directly to my water. And then I'm going to measure out 1.5 teaspoons. And that's going to give me a total of 1.5 tablespoons. Okay, I've added the salt to my water, and this is what's going to form our brine. And now all I'm going to do is take this wooden spoon, I'm going to give it a stir, and I'm looking to dissolve the salt. So I'll just stir here for a few seconds until it looks like I've gotten that salt into the solution. And that's looking pretty good. And now all I'm going to do is add my rinsed beans to this mix. I'm going to pour them straight in. And now we wait. These beans are going to soak in the brine for a minimum of 8 hours, up to 24 hours. And then I'll meet you back here and we'll finish making the black beans and rice recipe once these beans have brined. Okay. Our beans have been brining overnight, and the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and drain those beans, and then we will gather the rest of our ingredients for the recipe and get started. I'm just going to use this fine mesh strainer to drain the beans directly into my sink here. Now that the beans have been drained, I gave them a few quick shakes to get excess water off, and I'm just going to set those aside and revisit those in a little bit. The next thing we need to do is prep our station. So if you'll remember our trick from last week, we're going to take our damp paper towel and place that under our cutting board. And again, that just helps to keep our cutting board from moving around, gives us a nice firm foundation on which we can prepare the rest of our ingredients. So for this recipe, of course we're going to need black beans, and we're also going to need rice, since it is a beans and rice recipe. And we're going to need 1.5 cups of long grain rice. So I'm just using a 1/2 cup measure here, dry measuring cup. And I'm going to measure out 1.5 cups, which would be 3 1/2 cup measures of the rice. And it's going to get a similar rinse treatment. So the reason we're going to rinse the rice is to remove any excess starch that might be on the rice. So we're going to give it a good rinse under cold water. It's important that you use cold water for this. And that's going to knock off any excess starch that's on the surface of this grain. And if we don't do this, it could result in a gluey consistency in our beans and rice, which we don't want. So I'm going to take a second and rinse this. Just going to use my same fine mesh strainer, rinse it in cold water for about 30 seconds or so, just to get any of that excess starch off. We're ready to get started assembling the rest of our ingredients for the recipe. So in this recipe, we are going to use 2 cups of chicken broth. This is homemade chicken broth, and there will be a video that shows you how to make your own chicken broth at home. It's so easy, tastes so delicious, and you can completely control how much sodium is in it. If you don't have homemade chicken broth to use for this recipe, it's no problem. You can use any store-bought version, but I would recommend that you, at a minimum, get low sodium chicken broth, and you might also look for no salt added chicken stock. That can be used as well. But you don't want to get just the chicken broth in the cans. It's loaded with sodium. Let's choose one that has a little bit less. I prefer to control the amount of sodium I put into my recipe myself. And using a store-bought full sodium broth is one way to completely derail a low sodium diet. So we've got 2 cups of chicken broth here. We have 2 cups of water that we're also going to use, 2 bay leaves, 4 teaspoons of ground cumin, 2 tablespoons of red wine vinegar, 2 tablespoons of olive oil. We have a clove of garlic, 2 scallions, 2 green peppers, a lime, an onion, and some fresh oregano. And the final ingredient that we're going to use in this recipe are 6 slices of bacon. And I'm going to deal with this last to prevent any cross-contamination that might occur. We're going to set our meat products kind of to the side. So the first thing I'm going to do to prep for this recipe is to go ahead and seed and stem these peppers. So we're going to use the same technique that we used in the knife skills lesson for the last module. And when we do this, at the top we can just pop the stem and the seeds right out. There weren't very many seeds in this pepper. And the next thing we're going to do is just slice this pepper in half. We're going to reserve 1/2 of the pepper to go directly into our pot where we cook our beans. And then the other 3/2, essentially, the other pepper we're going to finely chop. And we'll do that here in just a few minutes. I'll go ahead and stem and seed this one as well. See how nicely that comes out? And I can pop the stem out just like this. We're definitely going to use this part, and then we'll use our technique that we learned last week. Chop the bottom off. Cut this into, and we'll cut the ribs out. And this gives us a nice flat surface, or not, fairly flat surface we can use to chop. We're going to finely chop this, so I'm going to cut this into really narrow matchsticks here. Remembering that bear claw, bear in the cave, tuck those fingers and the thumb out of the way. Got a good strong grip on my knife handle, holding it kind of like a bicycle handlebar. Keeping the tip of my knife down to the board at all times. This allows me just to pick it up and rock it up and down to get my chopping done. Got some good looking matchsticks here. And then once I have all of my peppers and matchsticks, I'm going to use that same technique that we used in our last module, kind of line them all up, hold them here with my bear claw. Okay, as you can see, I finished chopping the 3 halves of green pepper that are not going to go into the bean cooking liquid. I've put my 1 reserved pepper half here. And so now I'm going to go ahead with the preparation of the garlic and of the onion. And the first thing I'm going to do is pull 5 cloves of garlic off of the head of garlic that I have here. Sometimes you may find a head of garlic that's already kind of starting to sprout a little bit. That's fine. You could plant it in the ground and grow a garlic plant from that if you wanted to, but it's still good to eat. There's no reason not to use it. So there's 3, 4, and 5. And then what I'm going to do is simply take my knife and cut the head of garlic, the remaining head of garlic, across the equator. So not from tip to tail or, from the top to bottom, but right just across the middle. I'm going to leave the skin on it, not doing anything else except for cutting it in half. So when you do that, you'll be able to see kind of the core of the inside of the garlic cloves. And we're just going to put that directly into our bowl that will go into the bean cooking liquid. Set that aside. And then for our other cloves of garlic, we're going to finely mince them. And we learned how to do that in our last class, our last module. So we're just going to do that again. Remember, side of your knife, hand up, give it a good whack. That allows you to easily remove the outer layer of skin. We're going to do that with each of these. Now again, I could use my handy garlic press for this, but I wanted to remind you again how to mince garlic with your knife. There's no need for a fancy garlic press. You can do it all with your chef's knife. So keeping your hands away from the blade using your bear claw. Here, you're going to first chop into little slices. Take your time here, no reason to go too fast. So we're going to slice it all up. Practicing your form. And then once you have it all sliced, this is the fun chefy sort of part where you can take that left hand. Again, I'm right-handed, so my left hand is my supporting roll here. I'm going to hold it, fingers bent way back, out of the way, flat hand on top of the knife, and I'm just going to start rocking my knife up and down, running it back and forth over the garlic. And I just keep doing that until I get the garlic to the size that I want it for this recipe. And I do need it minced, so I'm going to do that a few more times here just to make sure I get it nice and uniform, nice and small. Now, scraping my knife over the board like this, I realize, is going to dull my knife more quickly. But I try to run my knife through the sharpener each time before I use it. But just be aware of that. And that's looking pretty good. So I've minced a couple cloves of garlic there. I'm going to go ahead and do that with my other cloves as well. So I've cleaned up my board now. I've got my 5 cloves of garlic minced right here. I've prepared my green pepper. I've got the pieces of the pepper and the garlic that are going to go in with my black beans set aside in this bowl. The next thing I'm going to do is prepare this fresh oregano. And so I need enough oregano prepared here for about a tablespoon. And what I'm going to do is hold the head of the stem right here, and I just pull down. That should free up all the leaves. So I'm just pulling the leaves off of the stem that way. I'm going to get myself a little pile going on here. Don't want to lose any of those fragrant leaves. I'm going to go ahead and use my chef's knife here to mince this up. Flat hand on top, running the knife up and down. This isn't a race, so no need to go too fast here. The more you do this, the more comfortable you get doing this. And that's when you can start to pick up the speed. But, there's nothing wrong with nice, slow and steady to get the hang of it. You can see I just have a few more pieces I sort of need to work into the mix for them all to be nice and even. I think this is going to be a pretty good amount here. So everything's nicely mixed. Let's do a little check here. And that's a tablespoon. That's what I need. So I'm not going to really need the rest of this. I hate to waste this, so I'm going to set this aside. I may use it for something a little bit later. And then finally, we're going to chop an onion. And half of the onion is going to go into the bean cooking liquid. The other half we're going to finely chop, and it will be used when we put the whole dish together, just like the finely chopped green pepper. So we're going to start here from the stem to the root end, just like we did before, keeping your fingers out of the way. And we're going to give ourselves a nice flat surface to work with. So half going straight into this bowl. The other half, we're going to peel off the outer layer. We're going to do the same thing we did in Module 1 with knife skills and peel back that first layer to sort of give us a, well, that didn't work. That was going to be my handle. Sometimes it pops off, and that's okay. We'll just go with it. We're going to cut the green end off. Flat hand on top. We're going for a small chop here, so I'm starting from the bottom, making my horizontal cuts. I don't want to go all the way through the onion. It's about 7/8 of the way back. Be very careful once you get towards the top here. Do not want to slice your hand. I'm going to call that good. And then using the tip of my knife, I'm just going to go down. Again, don't go all the way back. You want it to remain intact. That's the trick of this onion chop. And once you have that all done, bear in a cave, nice up and down motion here. Nothing goes to waste. That looks great. So then we'll set this aside for finishing up our recipe. The final two ingredients that we are going to use are these two green scallions as well as this lime. They will be used more of a garnish, so we're not going to do anything with them just yet. We'll wait and slice them and then cut them into wedges when it's time to serve our dish. Okay, the final step in getting our ingredients prepared for this recipe is the bacon. Now in this recipe you could use salt pork as well. Salt pork and bacon are both salt cured meats. Bacon's just a little bit easier to find and it takes a little bit less time to cook. So in this circumstance we're using 6 slices of bacon, and because this is a meat, I don't want to cross-contaminate. I don't want to use the same cutting board that I've been using for all my veggies. So I have this small red plastic cutting board. I like the feel of a wooden cutting board, so what I like to do is put my red plastic cutting board right on top. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm just going to chop this bacon into small cubes, and I'm going to do it a little bit at a time. It's already in slices, and so I'm just going to kind of go down. If you don't have a sharp knife here, it's going to make your job a lot harder. So make sure you get that knife nice and sharp. So I'm just going to finish this up, cutting this bacon into small cubes. And this is going to add a delicious amount of flavor to our dish. Obviously, because of the pork and the chicken broth we're using, this is not a vegetarian dish, even though you might think beans and rice would be vegetarian. This particular one isn't because of those ingredients that we're using. So I'm just going to finish this up with the final piece of bacon, and then we'll be ready to get started cooking.